Right now, from KTAB News, your local election headquarters, this is Big Country Politics.
Well, thanks for being here for this week's edition of Big Country Politics. I'm Victor Sotelo. We start our broadcast with the latest on COVID-19 here in Abilene. After more than 3 months of strict guidelines, KTAB's Monica Diaz explains how the county is dealing with the return to everyday life while making sure residents stay healthy.
Annette Lerma, Health Services Director, says with the recent spike in COVID-19 cases and people returning to normalcy may be the reason for the spike in cases.
I think everyone's kind of assuming that it's tied to reopening.
The gathering of people is not helping the situation.
People are starting to kind of go back to their normal lives. They're wanting to go to organized events, gather with larger groups. And so that's kind of what we're seeing in the positive cases.
Although the spike may concern many, Lerma says this was predicted.
We did expect a spike as those bigger urban areas saw.
As cases continue to grow,
we'll kind of just mirror what the governor said, and I think it boils down to personal responsibility.
Commissioner Chuck Statler explains that extending the disaster declaration helps the community as restrictions loosen up.
It means you have a little more latitude to go in with 75% movement in restaurants and places that there were restrictions. Some of those restrictions have eased up.
And as far as masks go, that's up to you, says Chuck.
If you are comfortable wearing a mask, and it's not mandatory, but if you want to mask up in public settings, do so.
Despite these precautions in place,
so we've definitely seen that take a sharp increase.
Numbers continue to grow in Taylor County. In Abilene, with coverage you can count on, Monica Diaz, KTAB News.
And the county did extend the disaster declaration. Basically, that means that it allows flexibility for cash-strapped cities and counties, and it can mean financial assistance later on for local governments to keep operating. All right, getting on to your education news. The Texas Education Agency is providing guidance to school districts across the state to give the school staff time to prepare for classes to resume in the fall. They clued in superintendents and lawmakers, and KTAB's Wes Rappaport tells us teachers, parents, and students are eager to dive through the documents to find out what the fall semester will look like.
As Texas sets a record for new COVID-19 cases, parents like Vanessa Steinkamp waited anxiously for the state to spill on when she'll be able to send her 3 kids back to the classroom.
I don't know how we go back safely. I don't know that there is a safe way, but at least acknowledging that there are a cohort of students that find schools to be a safe place would be a good start.
Schools get money based on student attendance. A key piece of the crisis response this spring was waiving daily attendance mandates so schools wouldn't take a financial hit. With a full school year about 2 months away, the state developed framework of options to ensure schools have predictable funding and accountability for educating students. One method of approved remote instruction involves live virtual classes with real-time lessons and timed online tests. Another focuses on self-paced online courses with pre-recorded instruction.
Our teachers are ready right now, to go back to school in a virtual setting.
The state is recommending staff and students wear masks, sanitize hands, and stay 6 feet apart from each other, but stopped short of requiring those measures, leaving much of the control in the hands of local districts.
All students and educators have to be guaranteed that there's going to be enough personal protection equipment, clean sanitation equipment. I mean, everything that we know needs to be in place physically before we can even consider, opening schools.
Steinkamp hopes the state will be flexible about its plan.
Maybe we won't get to go back, but at least if we're weighing it and being honest about it, that's the best we can do.
And the Texas Education Agency says they're still taking feedback on its public health plan. Now to our Eye on Abilene. During the last 4 weeks, riots, looting, and arson have taken over major cities across America. One of those demands is to defund police departments and use that money for social workers who would respond to calls instead of police. Abilene has been doing something similar for the past year. Not all calls, of course. Officers respond first. But if they find that there may be other issues, then criminal, the CRT. It's called the Criminal Response Team professionals trained to deal with individuals who may have mental health problems, illegal drug issues, or other concerns that do not necessarily require law enforcement. Abilene has been using the program for about a year, and 1,500 calls for service. 1/3 were crisis calls, basically calls for help. The chief talked about recommendations to police departments by the president across the country.
Goes on to say, and to provide guidance regarding the development and implementation of other mental health professionals working alongside law enforcement officers so that they arrive and address situations together. And the good news for our city is we have been doing this for well over a year. They forgot you'd even done it. So
Abilene is only the 3rd city in the nation and the 2nd in Texas to deploy the team. That includes law enforcement, paramedics, and mental health professionals to calls where they are needed. And still to come on Big Country Politics, how Abilene Police Department is hoping to build more trust with the community, and in-depth conversation with Police Chief Stan Standridge. We're back in 2 minutes. All right, welcome back to Big Country Politics, and joining me in the studio is Police Chief Stan Standridge and the Public Information Officer for the Abilene Police Department, Rick Tomlin. Thank you all for being on the show. We have something specific we want to talk about, and you guys released a little bit more information about it yesterday. It's called Project Threshold. You talked about it at the protest a couple of weeks ago, that you guys were going to be debuting this thing. What is that, Chief?
So several weeks prior, I asked my staff, what does different look like? You have to note that at a time when professional policing has gotten a lot better in the last 2 decades, we're better educated, we're better equipped, crime has actually gone down, so we have proven that we're very effective. The real question I think that as a nation we're struggling with is, are we more equitable? And consequently, that's why you see a lot of people who are speaking up, because they feel like they have no voice. And so 5 of us gathered together, and Rick was part of that group, and I just asked them, hey, what does different look like? And from that conversation came threshold. And just to get the imagery, threshold is at the bottom of a door, and it implies the door is open and you cross over the threshold into a new beginning, a new opening. In this case, we are crossing the threshold and coming into the community to engage our citizens and really give them a voice. Now, I would argue they've always had a voice, but really what we want to do is we want to talk to each other and not talk about each other and not talk past each other. So threshold has this idea of building equity through mutual understanding and finding our common ground, because right now we as a nation, we're very polarized.
The Project Threshold, I'm trying to envision what this looks like. I know we're at the very beginning stages. Is this a bi-monthly meeting, a monthly meeting between police and citizens? Is it always the same citizens? Do you have an idea of what it looks like right now?
Yeah, it's a weekly meeting. We started
weekly.
We started off with a weekly meeting. The first meeting was held last week, and what it was is just a kind of a meet and greet. When we talked about it initially, I like when somebody says or someone says, you know, doing nothing is not an option, and then how do you know what the other person or other group of people feel like without talking, without knowing what they want, without knowing how they feel? So I think that's the whole purpose of us getting together, is for the first part is finding out how people feel, finding out what they want. We can guess what they want, you know, as different people, but unless we have that discussion, you know, we're just going to be beating around the bush. So we hope to learn from each other, and then as the meetings grow, that the concepts grow, the feelings grow, and hopefully we make some changes.
Before we get into that meat of the meeting, do we how do you find the people who are going to be at this meeting?
So there were 5 of us in the original meeting, and so I consulted with them and I asked them, hey, you identify somebody in the community that you know that doesn't already have a voice. They don't already have a pulpit, so to speak. Find those people who are deeply passionate about this city, who would like to have a voice, and invite them to the group. And then I also spoke to the city manager and to the mayor. And so right now we stand at 7 community members, and there are 5 of us, 8 and 5, so we're at 13.
Okay. And who are these community members? And you already kind of described who you found. What's the makeup there is what I'm asking.
Go ahead, Rick.
We have, oh gosh, we have different backgrounds, races, age groups, and I think it was important for us to do that. You know, I came up with 2 different people, ended up with a younger Hispanic, and then just from there on, just different races and different ages, and different also work relations as well. So hopefully we can all come together and start talking about issues that are important not only to the police department but to our community.
Well, what is that conversation like when you're approaching somebody and say, hey, you want to be part of this meeting? Here's what we're going to do. What's that like?
Well, this was obviously on the heels of what happened with Mr. Floyd, you know, and everybody's, I think the whole country's tension was pretty high. And so, you know, Chief Standridge wanted to do something. We wanted to do something instead of sitting back and doing nothing and guessing what people want, how they feel. This is a great first step. And I would like to challenge other, whether it's businesses or other locations, to do the same thing. You know, if you have a business here in Abilene with 20 employees, 100 employees, have that little threshold meeting with those guys. How do you feel? How did it make you feel? Let's talk about getting past this issue or through this issue, or get together and discuss it instead of just not saying anything. And
it's not going to just be, threshold is not just about communication. It's not just about sitting around and talking through these issues. That's important. But we also want action items. We want to know from the community, what do you want to see us doing differently? So, as an example, for the last numerous weeks, we've been working through policy revisions. So there's been national discussion about a duty to intervene, about de-escalation, about chokeholds. So those policy revisions have already been done. Well, today we'll actually share those with the Threshold Committee and say, what do you think? What's missing? So we want action items to come out of this committee so that we can consider it. Because we know our profession well, but we also want to know if we're going to truly do community policing, then we need to have community at the table. Threshold gives us that.
It sounds like the very first step is getting in a room and talking about issues. That's the first step. And we want to know what it looks like in the future. And so when we come back here on Big Country Politics, we're going to keep talking to Chief Stan Standridge and Rick Tomlin, the Public Information Officer with the Abilene Police Department, about Project Threshold. We'll be back.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
All right, welcome back to Big Country Politics. In the studio with us is Police Chief Stan Standridge and the Public Information Officer with the Abilene Police Department, Rick Tomlin. Again, thank you all for being here. We're talking about Project Threshold. And before the break, you mentioned these policy changes that you're going to reveal or tell to the committee today, the Project Threshold Committee, I guess that's what you call them. What are the, and one of them specifically is the chokehold, and that's the big talk around the nation right now. What's the policy change within the Abilene Police Department specifically on chokeholds?
Our policy never actually authorized a chokehold. A chokehold impedes an airway, which is incredibly dangerous, so we didn't have to change our policy in respect to that. The duty to intervene. You see a lot across the nation about the notion of a duty to intervene. I would submit to you that previous sections in our policies, we have, A, B, C, D. B and C, they address those issues, but we were very intentional in the fact that we took the standalone use of force policy, which is D-David-4, And we actually put a provision in there that talks about the duty to intervene and the duty to report should an officer or any employee see force that's a deviation from policy. Those are the examples. We also reinforce this notion of de-escalation. You know, I'm really big on informed consent. Tell the citizen why you're doing what you're doing, and then ultimately they're more likely to obey that authority. Informed consent. And the academic level is called procedural justice. So we address all of those issues in our policy.
As far as de-escalation, you guys in the Abilene Police Department, in the academy, don't y'all, is there a class, is there a specific section on de-escalation?
Yeah, de-escalation is nothing new. We've been teaching de-escalation and using de-escalation for probably decades. It's not anything new. So what you're seeing across the nation is some agencies are just now playing catch-up. Now, your police department in Abilene, we've been recognized, meaning we're an accredited police agency. We're on our 9th year. So we have to comply with 168 best practices. So we've been doing this for a long time. But that doesn't necessarily equate to every other police department, even in Texas. There are only about 2% of all Texas agencies that are accredited. That's worrisome. We can do better in this profession.
Chief, when we've talked about, and we ran a story right before you came on here about the CRT team, the crisis response team. This is also something that you guys celebrated a year yesterday, right, or in doing this. And I think it was more of a response, I could be mistaken, more of a response to maybe an overcrowding jail, or was this,
no,
talk about that.
So,
let me talk a little bit about before the CRT, I guess, came into play. I attended a few discussions that Chief had with different organizations. The one that I remember was at the Texas Tech Pharmacy School, talking to a group of health professionals and how policing has become, I guess, challenging because of the mental issues in communities throughout the nation, and Abilene as well. So I remember sitting there listening to that and him talking about kind of what threshold we're doing with threshold. Something needs to change. And so out of the discussions that our administration has had with health professionals and city management and other things, I think CRT was born, and I think we're the third law enforcement agency in the nation,
second in Texas,
yeah, second in Texas, to actually have the CRT team or CRT. So it just speaks volumes to, again, doing nothing is not an option. So being progressive is good.
And this is basically a team that goes in there. That way, it's not just law enforcement officers and the tool that I guess is used too much sometimes, not specifically here in Abilene, but you just take somebody to jail, right? I mean, and to separate them from the problem, and that's what CRT is trying to put a, one of the things they're trying to put a stop to.
When we did our homework with the help of Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, we learned that 37% of the inmates at our county jail have a mental health issue. 37%. But when you have a loved one within your family who is having a mental health crisis and you call 911, my question is, what crime has been violated? So what we had to do is we had to ask the question, what does different look like? So we created a co-responder team. It has a peace officer, it has a firefighter paramedic, so we can divert some of these calls away from Hendrick, and it also has a Betty Hardwick licensed clinician. They arrive simultaneously in the same vehicle so that we can provide scene security, medicine, and ultimately psychiatric care.
Chief, and we only have a couple of minutes, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I know you're leaving here pretty soon. You have job interviews, you're seeking another job. How is this program going to continue here in Abilene without your guidance?
I'm confident that all of these programs will continue because they're reflective of best practices. These programs are not Stan Standridge's initiative. They're professional policing initiatives. I would definitely think that our community would sustain the homelessness initiative, They're going to sustain the CRT. In fact, we're about to add a second team. We'll have that second team stood up within a couple of months. So these, although I've had a remarkable influence on them, they are going to be sustained because it's the right thing to do.
And before we go, is there anything that maybe I didn't ask you that you want to convey to the public? You got about 30 seconds.
I would say that we have a remarkably good community. But everybody says that, and they almost as if it's dismissing that we still have core issues in our city. What I want to encourage us to do, Rick and I really want to encourage everybody to do, is let's try to find the common ground. And let's start talking to each other and not past each other. Let's recognize that as a nation we're polarized, but as a city we don't have to be. And it's my hope for Abilene, and I'll say this without any shame, that we dwell together in unity. Because ultimately where we have unity, we're going to have commanded blessings. That's what I want for Abilene. Commanded blessings.
Well, thank you for being here, Rick Tomlin and Police Chief Stan Standridge. Appreciate y'all being here.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back on Big Country Politics.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
And thanks for staying with us. The military, police, fire, aviators all have one thing in common: constant training. The more you train, the better you'll be when it counts. At Dyess Air Force Base, there's a new way of training: virtual. Dyess is the first base to use this new vision, with which KTAB Jessica Rank was able to see exclusively for KTAB's Eye on Dyess report.
Protection switches to off.
You've got the big headsets and the controllers.
Whoa, that was trippy.
But this is all work, no play.
This is the future of training.
Dyess airmen stepping off the flight deck and into this virtual reality.
It's a medium they feel comfortable and relaxed in.
Learning a little more about the aircraft they're working on.
This just gives it a fresh inject of new innovation, a level of innovation that wasn't there before.
Tech Sergeant Hogue has been working along Staff Sergeant Clinton to bring this new form of training to the base, which they say replicates the feeling of working on a C-130 without getting your hands dirty.
We can actually see every single student get trained to the level they need to.
Which is very different from the old way of doing things.
I don't know the level of understanding if I take an airman out to the plane and I'm training them. And they could walk away and forget everything.
Everybody got it?
But in this, I'll have a report that tells me exactly what they understood.
Yep, there you go. You found it.
And by the time that's done, they're going to have a deeper level of understanding, and we have a provable method that they've learned.
And besides the fact that this gives each trainee their own set of wings to learn on,
in this room, I can fit 16 aircraft.
It also leaves room for mistakes without consequences.
Out in the flight line, there's a real barrier of just saying, I don't want to touch anything because if I touch something, maybe something breaks. And then down the line, that costs somebody their lives.
And whether they're training newbies,
I'm excited for every student that comes through here,
or teaching veterans new things.
They haven't been able to see things like this.
Dyess says they're excited to be able to lead a path to the future.
Switch to standby.
At Dyess Air Force Base with coverage you can count on, Jessica Rank, KTAB News.
And the airmen will be graduating from this one-of-a-kind virtual maintenance training program next month. All right, that does it for this week's edition of Big Country Politics. For the latest in political headlines, always go to bigcountryhomepage.com. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Thanks for watching.